Hello everyone and welcome back to a beginner's guide to making Balatro mods. As I said in the first episode, my name is the Astra and I am a well-seasoned member of the Balatro dev community. If you want to know what I've done, just watch the first episode. I go over that in the very beginning. And in this episode, we are going to go over making your first Joker. So in this episode, we're actually going to make 3 different types of Jokers that do 3 different things that will scale in complexity as we go. And obviously this will probably end up being the meat and bones of your mod. Okay, so we're basically starting off where we left off last time, except I added a couple regions that make it a lot easier for me to organize the file. This will also be pushed to the repo. But as you can see here, we're going to fill up this atlas's region right here. So you're probably asking right now, what is an atlas? Well, an atlas is basically a synonym for a sprite sheet. And this is how you tell the game, okay, this is a image file that I want you to load that I can use for the art for my Jokers, or any game object as a matter of fact. I went ahead and off camera added to the assets folder these placeholder sprite sheets. If you're curious on the different dimensions you need for your Jokers or cards or whatever, it is usually 71 by 95. And you should leave a pixel of transparency along the border of each card or object. And if you're curious about the difference between 1x and 2x, 1x is the normal size that is without pixel smoothing. 2x is the upscaled size. It is basically double the dimensions. All right, so how do we make an atlas? First off, we are going to type smods.atlas. If I can type right today, holy cow. And I know I've mentioned Smods a few times, but I've never really explained what that is. Smods is our modding library. It has a ton of different functions and objects that we use as prototypes to create all of our in-game objects, how we make everything work. I will leave a link to the Smods wiki down below. It is a very well fleshed out library of code, and learning the ins and outs of it will help you a ton in the long run. Now that we have this, we're going to fill it up with our bunch of attributes that will tell it, okay, this is the file that we need. This is the size of each object. So I'm going to give it a key. And since all of these are placeholder assets, I'm going to call it placeholders. Now I'm going to give it a path, which is obviously the file name. I will say you do need the file name to be the same across the 1x folder and the 2x folder. That is very important. So placeholders.png. So now we need to give it the pixel height and pixel width. So px equals 71 and py equals 95. And just like that, that is an atlas fully set up. They are not very hard at all to get going. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually start making our Jokers. So I'm going to go to the Jokers folder, add a file here, and let's call it joker1.lua. You can call this whatever you want. We're going to start off very similar to the atlas, smods.joker with some brackets. And this is the very base of our Joker. So similar to the atlas, I'm going to start with a key. The point of a key here is to distinguish between each individual Joker object. This is the same thing for atlases or any other object that uses this key, which is basically every single one. These have to be unique, but only unique within your mod, as each key smods will automatically add the prefix that you put here in your metadata in front of the key. Unless you specify, but that's a little more advanced. We will not be going into that in this series. So for my key here, I'm just going to call it Joker1 as well. I'm going to give it an atlas attribute, and since I called my atlas placeholders, I'm going to give it the placeholders atlas. Now I'm going to give it a pause, which is the position on the atlas that the sprite will be taken from. So it starts at 0, so this card in the top left will be 0, 0, or x equals 0, y equals 0. This is x equals 1, y equals 0. This is y equals 1 equals 0, and so on and so forth. So I think I want this to be a common Joker. This is not a very strong Joker. So I'm going to give it and x equals 0 and also y equals 0 for the position. So now we want a config table. This table will hold all of the values that we're going to use for our actual effect. So what I want for this Joker is I want it to give 100 chips during the main Joker scoring cycle. So I'm going to do config extra equals. The extra table isn't necessarily required, but it is a standard within the community. Just makes it a lot easier for people to understand the code. And I'm just going to do chips equals 100. This does nothing on its own, but it essentially adds all of this to the Joker's ability table, which we will get into very shortly. Next up, I want to give it a rarity, and I'm going to make it 1. So the rarity system is on a number scale. So 1 equals common, 2 equals uncommon, 3 equals rare, and 4 is legendary. And for custom rarities, it will use a string. So let's say Cryptid, for example, with their exotics, it would be cry exotic. But since this is not Cryptid and it is not a very strong Joker, it's just going to be a common at 1. Next, I want to set a cost for it. I think I want to make it $5. So cost equals 5. And finally, there's a bunch of compatibility variables that you can set. Most of them should be set by default the way you want them. But let's say I didn't want to make this blueprint compatible. I do blueprint compat equals false. I don't know why you wouldn't do this, or why you would do this for a Joker like this, because it is very simple. It is not hard to implement, and it is not hard to copy. So we're just gonna get rid of that for now, but for the sake of telling you how it works, that's how. And finally, we're gonna add a lock vars function, self info queue card. And what this will do is, once we get to the localization of things, we will touch on that this episode. This will add all of the values that you put into it into the actual localization text. So kind of how like the basic Balatro Joker, he gives plus for a mole. If I do return a table, vars equals another table, not cars, vars. And then card.ability.extra.chips. And essentially what this is doing is it's taking the chips value from the config table, that's what ability references, and is outputting it to the description. This will make a lot more sense once I start explaining how the localization stuff works. All right, and that's basically the start of the Joker. We will be following this whole format for the rest of them. So let's now start with a calculate function. So what is calculate? This is essentially the quintessential function for every single object in the game. What this does is whenever a context is called, it will run through the Joker order or whatever card you're holding and call this function right here. Now, what is a context? A context is essentially a flag in the function being called that tells the Joker exactly what is happening right now. There are a ton of different contexts, so many that I cannot list them all out. I am going to link the Smods wiki page that lists out all of the context for you in plain English. Just be warned, there are a ton of them. So I'm going to do self card context. And as I said, I want this Joker to give 100 chips during the main Joker scoring cycle. So I'm going to go if context.joker main, which is the main Joker scoring context. I'm going to return chips equals card the ability. If I can type today, again, extra chips. All right, so that is basically a completely finished Joker. This guy should load in game and give me 100 chips on scoring. So let's go and test that out. Alrighty, so here we are in game with our Joker. Obviously, it doesn't have a description yet because I did not do any of the localization. But if I do a quick pair here, look at that, 100 chips, easy peasy. If you're wondering how I got the Joker so fast, I was using a mod called Debug Plus. Very helpful when you're doing development. I will link that in the description down below. So, as I said, we do not have any text on the Joker quite yet. So what I'm going to do here is add a new folder. call it localization, and add a file called en-us.lua. Return, and that is the beginning of our localization file. So what this is essentially a big file full of all sorts of different keys, text, descriptions, all that sort of stuff. So how do we add a description to our Joker? So I'm going to first add a descriptions table to our return with curly braces, not parentheses, please, and equals. And then I'm going to add a Jokers table. And then I'm going to add J XMPL Joker 1. I'm going to give it a name and call it Joker 1. And I'm going to give it text, which must be a table. Each line of string will translate as a new line in the description. And I'm going to do C chips. What this does is it will color any text that comes after it. I'm going to do plus £1. This is where the lock varies function comes in. So right here, this is the first entry in the vars table, and that's what this signifies here. This is a reference to the first entry in this vars table right here. I hope that makes sense. It was a little tricky concept for me to pick up, but I hope I laid it out well enough for you. So I'm going to add some empty brackets here that resets the styling done from this, and then chips. And that is a completed localization entry. So let's boot the game back up. I'm going to go to mods, my example mod, additions, jokers, and there he is, Joker 1 plus 100 chips. Easy as that. All right, so that's our first Joker for the day, but we are not done yet. I want to get a little more complicated and a little more in-depth to give you an idea of what all is possible with Jokers. So I'm going to do a very similar thing. Joker2.lua. I'm actually just going to copy this over so that way it's a bit easier for me to do. That is the wrong file. I'm going to do Joker2. I actually think I want this to be uncommon, so I'm going to do position x equals 1, rarity equals 2, and then cost equals, let's go $6. So this Joker, I want it to be every scoring club gives $1. The money will scale every 1 trigger, and then the money resets every round. Let's go dollars equals 1, reset equals 1, and let's do card.ability.extra equals dollars for the vars in block vars. So what contexts would we use here? Well, first we want to see what card is scoring. So if we want to check if a playing card is scoring, we want if context not individual. And if we want it to be scoring in the hand, we want and context card area equals g.play. G.play is a card area that is where all of the cards being scored are held, or not scored, but played. If context.individual and context.area equals g.play, we've also got to check if the card scoring is a club. So context.other card, forgot an and here. Other card is a direct reference to the card being scored. And then is suit. And then clubs. So how do I know this is suit function is something that exists? Well, I'm going to introduce you to your dump. This is a feature implemented by Lovely that dumps all of the game code right into this folder right here. So you can view it easy peasy. Look at that. Or where would this is suit be? Well, I would assume it'd be in card.lua. So I'm going to search is suit. There's a bunch of references to it, but here it is like that. So obviously card is suit. We'll check a suit and see if the card is of that suit. I'm going to get rid of Joker 1 here. This will check if an individual playing card is scoring in the play area and if the card is a club. And I would want to return dollars equals card dot ability dot extra dot dollars. So this should work out of the box, but I want to give it a little extra flavor. So instead of doing it like this, I'm going to do smods.calculate effect. What this does is it essentially emulates this return table here, but you don't actually have to do it. So I'm going to do dollars equals card dot ability extra dot dollars. And I'm also going to make the card this is scoring on context dot other card. That way the message will actually show up on the other card and not my Joker. So I want this to scale too, right? So I'm going to do a smods.scale card function. This is not a necessary function at all, but it helps a lot with mod compatibility for mods that like to manipulate how things scale. Like if you've ever played Maximus, the Soil Joker relies on this to double scaling values. So I'm going to add card, a table. I need to give it a ref table or a reference table. So ref table equals card dot ability dot extra ref value or reference value equals in quotes dollars, and then scalar value. I actually should add this as well, equals 1. So that way it scales for 1. Scalar value equals scalar. And I want the message color to be, let's go GC attention. So that is a basic scale card function. Nothing too crazy there. And in reality, I don't think I need this return anymore with how I'm doing this. So easy as that. And as I said, I would like this to reset at the end of the round. So if context dot end of round and not context dot blueprint, because the reason we add this is because we don't want the blueprint resetting the value as well. We just want it to reset once. And context dot main scoring. So that way this doesn't happen during repetition or whatever. Editor Asher here. Context dot main scoring is not the correct thing to be using here. I do catch this a little bit later, but just note this is not correct. Then we're going to set card dot ability dot extra dot dollars to card dot ability dot extra dot reset. Okay, this should work. And if it doesn't, I will come back and make the edits I need to. So let's go in game and check it out. All right, so if we play this 7 of clubs here, it should score, give us money, this upgrades, and there we go. Works just as I intended. So once again, play this 5, get some money, that's $2. Easy peasy. One thing I do realize I just now forgot is adding a reset message when it does reset. So I'm going to add this return message equals localize k underscore reset. So why I'm using this localize here is so that way this message translates properly whenever this triggers, and k reset is the localization key to reset in vanilla Balatro's localization. So speaking of localization, I obviously don't have localization for this Joker just yet. So I'm going to go do a very similar thing as the first one. J underscore XMPL Joker 2 equals name equals Joker 2 text equals. Now I think I want to do a multi-box for this since it has two relatively different effects. So I'm going to do another table here. Gives C, I forget if it's dollars or money. I think it's money. C money, $1 for each scoring club card. And I also want to make this styling code clubs. And then for this here, I'm going to add another table to give it an extra box. And then money scales by C attention, yet another styling code. I'm going to make this 2 and go over here and add the scalar value to lockvars ability.extra.scalar. So that way, if that changes for whatever reason, it is shown properly as here. Money scales by 1 every trigger. And then at the end here, I'm going to add inactive in parentheses resets at end of round. All right, so let's go back in game and take a look at that. And there we go. It's showing properly in game. I'm going to make that a 7 really fast. Make this just like this. Money, money. And I'm going to play this jack. So $3. Ah, I didn't win. Whoops. Ah, that did not reset properly. I'm going to have to check that out. You know what? I actually did not need this main scoring context right here. So I'm going to get rid of that. And instead of main scoring, I'm going to do and not context dot repetition and not context dot individual. That way this doesn't trigger for any other playing card that might get scored at the end of round, like let's say a gold card or a steel card or whatever. So let's go back in game. All right, and a cool thing about Debug Plus is if you hold tab, you get this big menu here with a bunch of different options to do. So I'm just gonna win the blind to test that out. And it resets. Easy peasy. All right, so let's do one more joker here. This one is a little different. It won't actually use a calculate. So I'm going to copy joker 2 and make this joker 3. I think I want to make this guy rare, so 2. So what I want this joker to do is I want it to give me 2 extra discards when I'm holding it and give me money per every discard not used at the end of the round. In the cash out menu, not from the joker itself, in the cash out. So I'm going to do discards equals 2. I said I want to make this rare, so 3. Make it $7. And do discards there. And as I said, I don't actually think I need a calculate function for this. So I'm going to get rid of that altogether. And instead I'm going to have add to deck, which will trigger every time this card is added to the deck. A card being added to the deck is terminology used anytime a card is bought, selected from a pack, or created by another card. In other words, cards in your deck are cards that you currently own during a run. So for this, I'm going to do self card from debuff. Doesn't really matter too much from debuff. So I'm going to do, so I'm not entirely sure how I would edit the discards like this. Well, I kind of do, but just for educational purposes, let's go back to card.lua and let's see how the wasteful voucher does it. Oh, so it does it like that. So I'm just going to take that, go over here, going to make this card.ability.extra.discards. Do the same thing here. So this is all well and good, but if we remove it from the deck, it doesn't actually remove those values. So instead, I'm going to do a very similar thing, remove from deck, which very similar to add to deck will trigger every single time this card is removed from the deck. So very similar to add to deck. I'm literally just going to copy this, paste that there, and do minus for both of those. And I'm going to add this a third function called calc, not calculate, dollar bonus. And that's going to equal function self part. So you may have seen me doing self a lot here. That is a reference to this prototype object, like the object that this card is being based off of, not the card itself. You will almost never be using a self, but you need it in the function definition because it's always passed in. And so I want this to give money for every discard remaining. So if I am not mistaken, delayed gratification does just about that. Editor Asher here once again. I know I'm looking in the dump code for this, but I would actually recommend using the vanilla remade project to reference any sort of vanilla Joker or object or whatever. It is a complete reimplementation of every single Joker or vanilla object in Smod's code. It's a fantastic project. I helped contribute to it, and it's something I wish I had when I was starting this hobby. A link to vanilla remade will be put in the description down below. And I will take this discards left and then return that. Easy peasy. Let's go in game. And if I add this Joker, look at that. I get my discards. And so if I win the blind here, theoretically, I will get $6. Precisely. And now if I sell this, there go my discards. Relatively simple, right? I also just realized I want to explain a few things here. Ease discards obviously eases the number of discards currently. G-game round resets discards is a little more different. This is what the discard value will reset to at the end of every round. That is very important to set. Otherwise, if you just do ease discard, that's just gonna do it for the one round. Let's get this here, J, XMPL. Going to go in game one final time just to show you that localization. And there we are. So that is all three of these Jokers done. These will be on the repo for you to view. And yeah, now you know how to make a few different Jokers. Hope you got some use out of this episode. And the next episode will be all about lovely patching. So stay tuned for that. That is a big one.